Question here from Anxiously Chronoed Figured. Hey gents, exclamation point, since we're probably in for one of the longest console generations yet, and we shouldn't expect many big crisis-like leaps in visuals, do you think developers will start focusing on other ways to make their games stand out? Maybe more advanced physics, unique mechanics, or other innovations? One can hope, right? Cheers! Exclamation point. Oliver, that sounds pretty great, doesn't it?
It does sound pretty great, but I'd say these are all like really hard things. Like I obviously I took a look at Battlefield. I'm continuing to take a look at the latest Battlefield 6, and if you look at that game, it has kind of a, it kind of has this destruction system that's interesting looking and has some kind of physics based components with the way that the physicalized debris and whatnot falls, and that's certainly a visually satisfying system. But at a core level, it's very similar to the destruction system that shipped in 2010 in Bad Company 2, in the sense that it's a state-based system. You kind of blow out walls there, these predefined chunks that you can damage in the structures, and if you hit a certain number of those critical points, you can in some cases bring down parts or the entire structure. It's a kind of similar system in terms of the way that it works. Fundamentally, it does feel like a very similar system to the system that shipped in Bad Company 2. And I just think if you want to do something more real than that, quote unquote, more physics based, like in Teardown, that is not really a physics system. That is not really a destruction system that's going to scale, I think, to the needs of a multiplayer shooter, to the needs of a big single player shooter that needs to have more directed levels, that needs to have all these constraints placed on it to actually function as a game. So I think the reason why devs focus on visuals in many cases is because they are controllable, because they are manageable. When you look at a game like Tears of the Kingdom, for instance, that has these very complex gameplay systems, has lots of interesting physics going on, has game-breaking features like the warp above you and all that stuff, that is a very hard game to make. That took 6 years. They were reusing a lot of the map from the original title, and that was a very arduous, I think, development process where they were talking about a lot of polishing of the various systems they had in that game to make sure that it worked and make sure that it was stable enough to meet AAA standards. I think there are some things you can do that are interesting with simulation. Like I look at the recent Astrobot game, a lot of that game's physics and stuff like that. It's very much a visual showcase, right? It does not have as much impact on gameplay. But I think if you want to actually introduce physics, if you want to introduce these components as fundamental aspects of your game, then I think in many cases you're talking about different kinds of games than the games that exist nowadays. And I don't know those games always slot into the AAA bucket. I don't know that the physics-based Battlefield is a AAA game, right? I think that Battlefield is the way it is because of the kind of game it is, and not because of some kind of fundamental technological limitation. So, yeah, just a few thoughts there.
What do you think, John? Because I'm kind of thinking back to the Xbox 360 generation where we did actually see things, go in very different directions. You saw games like Assassin's Creed arrive. You saw Far Cry 2 and Crysis in that same period where they were, doing things that were just kind of crazy compared to the prior generation.
I mean, that was that whole generation of let's simulate things, right? And I would argue it kind of started with like late 90s. There was some PC stuff and things like Shenmue as well, where it was like, what if we could just recreate like these cities and all these little minutia? What if you could open a drawer and pull stuff out? Like that was like an aspiration that a lot of developers had. And in the end, I think for most types of games, from a gameplay perspective, it wasn't always that interesting. But building a simulation-based game definitely is something that can work and is quite cool, but it's also quite challenging. And to tie that into the physics discussion, I always say physics is one of those things where it's either just a visual effect or it's a gameplay mechanic. And a lot of games use physics for pure visual splendor. I would say that's where Astrobot mostly falls, right? And I think that's awesome, where the physics interactions, mostly it just looks cool, but it doesn't fundamentally change the game. Whereas some of the other stuff, that we've seen before, like, actually, I mean, Crysis is one where I would say, since that was referenced, that was an example of physics being used for gameplay purposes to some degree. Being able to blow up an entire shack and just the way things reacted, that did have an effect on the gameplay that was really cool. But doing that stuff's hard. We haven't had many big physics-based games for a long time. I think one of the biggest ones that I can remember in the last decade is something like The Last Guardian, which was one gigantic, insane physics AI like thing where you have this giant creature that's moving independently of the player, and you have to somehow work together. And I'm surprised when you see how that game came out. It's insane that it worked at all. To be honest, that was so stupidly ambitious, especially for the PS3 era when it started development. But it also didn't work for everyone because those types of games are really, really hard to make, as far as I can tell. So, but I think at this point we're just. I don't think we're gonna get anything where it's like you see like this giant leap that seems way beyond where we've ever expected it to go, unless there's some sort of like major paradigm shift in terms of rendering. Like it didn't go fully the way I necessarily expected, but you look at what Media Molecule did with Dreams, and like some of the stuff that it was able to render was like almost like unbelievable. Like you're like, how the heck did this work? Because they fundamentally rendered things in a very different way. And I could see someone coming up with something like that, maybe even exploiting like ray tracing hardware, or like doing something to render Outer World in a way that's very fundamentally different than we currently do it, and coming up with results that we don't expect. I could see that happening, maybe. We don't know what that looks like yet, though. But outside of that, I think most games, the biggest limitation on how good something looks currently is still going to be a budget thing and a manpower thing, right?
Right. Well, maybe there's actually going to be a full realization of the stuff that was promised for this generation. So, you think about those original Unreal Engine 5 demos, you think about the Matrix Awakens. True. Have we actually seen games that kind of live up to the promise of those demos?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, Matrix Awakens looked, that was still absolutely stunning rendering. But I mean, the only hope on that front is I still think I'm very curious to see how Gears E-Day turns out. Like they're the ones that can probably get closest to realizing that.